Okay, so we at Greater Idaho are trying something new. We have a lot of people across Eastern Oregon that work with our organization that are involved with what we do, and just are the people of Eastern Oregon. And we want to start highlighting some of those people, highlighting their unique experiences in Eastern Oregon, and also giving them an opportunity to talk about what's important to them and why they're involved with this movement. So today is our first one of these that we're going to do. And so we have brought on a very special guest. I have with me today Alicia Zinni, who is our Wallowa County captain out in Wallowa County. And Alicia is a former federal employee that got involved with our movement 3 years ago. She has an expertise in research and really diving deep into things. And as we've discovered, she also is an excellent writer. So she writes for our Substack. So I want to welcome Alicia. Thanks for joining me for this.
Well, thank you, Matt. It's good to be here.
Yeah, why don't you tell us just real quick before we jump in? And our goal for this is, just 5 to 10 minutes and to kind of highlight your most recent Substack. But how did you get involved in Greater Idaho? Why are you with us?
Well, I first learned about Greater Idaho when a ballot measure was on our county ballot to vote on whether the county commissioners should hold regular meetings to discuss the interests of Wallowa County on moving the border between Oregon and Idaho. And as I learned more about it, I thought this is a really creative idea. It's a lot more nuanced than some of the solutions that some people have been pursuing, mainly just arguing with each other about their differences. And it provides a peaceful resolution for a long-term dispute. So as I learned more, I became aware that there was a team working on this, and I approached them about whether I as a writer could help them out. And we found that there were some topics I could help with, and eventually opened a Substack channel. And another member and I have been writing for that. And the most recent piece I wrote was about fraud in Oregon.
Yeah, so we are really glad that you found us, Alicia, because you do such a great job of digging into these complex topics and putting it in simple terms that people can understand. Like you mentioned, your latest Substack was on fraud in Oregon, which is a huge topic. It's a huge topic in Oregon. It's a huge topic across the country. I think we're starting to see across the country with Minnesota and with all the work that DOJ was doing that there is a lot more fraud going on than we ever imagined. And that is true in Oregon as well. So your latest piece, you dug into some of those in Oregon. Will you pick one area and just fill our audience in on one topic that you discovered?
Well, sure. One of the most timely topics would be with the transportation tax bill and the citizen objection to that the legislator passed a $4.3 billion tax bill without any sort of citizen involvement. So as many people know, that there will now be a ballot measure. Well, we'll remain to see when it will happen, but that it would make the citizens responsible for voting whether they want that. And I might just stop for a minute and define what I'm thinking of when I say fraud. Sometimes it's referred to as waste, fraud, and abuse. But I think for the average taxpayer, anything that doesn't give them some sort of results from their taxes, they're ready to call it fraud because they have not seen any help from their tax contributions. So in the transportation tax bill, I think what was interesting is the threats that the governor was making, that if this wasn't passed, then they would have to start firing snowplow drivers or routine maintenance personnel. And that just didn't seem right because there was already a funding bill passed earlier in the legislature that fully funded the Oregon Department of Transportation's maintenance responsibilities. So it makes you start looking into, well, what was this additional tax going to fund? And when you look into it, you find that there is a complex of nonprofits that are funded by our Department of Transportation dollars. And I think that many of those have been long-term planning projects that have not yielded results over the year. An example might be the Albina Cap in north of Portland that supposedly is to reunite a fractured neighborhood that occurred when I-5 was first constructed 70 years ago. Another one is the Columbia River Bridge, which is now the Interstate Bridge. Just years and years of planning and discussion and conceptual efforts that never result in anything concrete. So when you have something like this, you have to ask, is fraud going on? And I think there are some areas that it is.
So Alicia, I think it would be news to most people. I think, you mentioned the average taxpayer and I'm a grassroots citizen that's involved in this organization. You're a grassroots, just a local citizen. I think an average taxpayer has this idea of the way government works, where we pay our taxes. There's a government entity that performs these core functions. They take that money, they perform these core functions for us, like you mentioned, plowing our roads, keeping sand and gravel on the roads, and keeping our roadways safe. But what you're saying is, when you start looking into the transportation department, when you start looking in the transportation department, there's actually a plethora of nonprofit organizations that are Department of Transportation, which we all think that we're giving money to solve these problems. It is then going and finding these nonprofit groups as almost a middleman and giving them money to go solve some of those problems. Is that an accurate way of laying that out?
It is. They are given a task when they're given these government funds to complete something. There's a mission statement. There's probably a set of deliverables in the grant that says you need to do these things with the money. But in general, those are very vague requirements. And typically the only requirement that seems to need to be done is to spend the money. And so these organizations are being funded with our taxes in a means that has very little accountability, because a nonprofit is not subject to public records requests. It's not subject to public meeting requirements. Their financial disclosures are very minimal. And so the citizen has a hard time understanding what's happened to their money once it goes to a nonprofit.
Do we have any idea how much money, how many of these organizations we're talking about?
I don't think we do. And that seems to be the concern, is that we have perhaps in Minnesota, we were seeing some very large amounts of dollars in specific areas. In Oregon, I think it's a little bit more systemic, is that every program has a lot of this going on, and it's going to take some work to unearth it.
Well, Alicia, that's very enlightening what you've shared with us today. Personally, I had no idea that there's Department of Transportation nonprofits that are out there taking government tax dollars, maybe providing some value, maybe not, and that we really have no idea how many of these there are that are out there. I want to encourage people to go to our Substack. So transportation is just one area that you covered in your Substack article. There are multiple other areas. I want people to go to our Substack, read that article. And one of the things that we've committed to as an organization is, as this is becoming uncovered, not just in Oregon, but all over. And people are starting to get awakened to the fact that there's all this fraud, and all these nonprofits that we never knew existed are actually out there siphoning off tax dollars and without any accountability whatsoever. We've committed as an organization to help amplify that. If people find fraud, if they go out and they say, hey, did you know this is happening with the learning centers or preschools or Department of Transportation or whatever, we are committed as an organization to getting that information out there and helping the average taxpayer, like you talked about, know what's happening with their tax dollars and hold their government accountable. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for the good work on the Substack. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Matt. It's good to be here today. Thanks.